In between the leadership of Joshua, who we spent a month or so looking at, 2 months, I guess. In between the leadership of Joshua and the rise of the kings, there was this period in between in which Israel had rescuers or deliverers, people who were not in an official capacity, the leader or the president or the king or anything else, but they were people who God chose to raise up to positions of leadership, men and women at different points and different seasons of their lives and different seasons in the history of his own people to get them out of trouble. So it was less of a kingship and more of a Moses moment of a, God, we're in trouble, get us out of this mess. And God would respond by raising up these leaders. Other nations had kings, but God's desire was that his own people just look to him, letting the Lord be their king. And so Israel had no king, but God would at times send these judges. There were not in the judicial sense, but send judges as leaders or rescuers to get his people out of trouble. The issue was that it didn't always work out the way the people had hoped and even perhaps the way God intended. Sometimes God would respond to their prayers, their requests for a miracle, and what they ended up with was a monster. And we're going to look at one of those today, another monster story, a moment in which God's people needed help. They needed a rescuer, a deliverer, a judge. And what they ended up getting was ultimately a monster. An angel appears to a lady. We don't even have her name. We just know that she had been unable to have a child. She had an encounter with an angel or messenger from God in some supernatural kind of way. And she was told that she was going to have a child. She needed a little confirmation. She got that from the messenger. And there was no what to expect when you're expecting book for the Israelite women during this time. So God chose to help coach her along. And he said, hey, I tell you what, don't take any alcoholic drinks at all. Don't eat any unclean foods. One, because it's just good advice for a pregnant lady. But two, because your child is going to be unique, special. This child is going to ultimately take the vow, the promise of a Nazirite, meaning someone who is not just set apart to lead, but someone who is spiritually also going to be in a place of leadership and in a spiritual example of how God's people are to live. And so there was this special thing. You could always go back and take a look at what a Nazirite really means. But they have several promises that they take, several vows that they make when they're going to be a Nazirite. And one is no alcohol, one is no unclean foods. They're not going to be around dead animals. They're going to let their hair grow out. They've got all of these different rules, and not too many, but a good set of rules that they were going to follow in order to be a Nazirite. She gets the message. She goes to her husband. We know his name. His name's Manoah. And she says, Manoah, I'm going to have a child. He said, I don't believe it. She says, no, I had an angel, a messenger came to me, and he said, well, let's ask that God give us that messenger again. And so they prayed, and God sent the messenger back. So he gets confirmation. Now they both realize that they're going to ultimately have a child. And 9 months later, they have a baby boy, and they name him Samson. And we're told in Judges chapter 13 that the Spirit of God began to stir in Samson. There was a literal thing happening to him in which God's presence was on him in a powerful way. Now, the visible expression of this was not in what he wore. It wasn't in a particular style of clothes or some necklace or something he was to wear, some robe or something on his head. His set apart moment showed up in his strength. He was incredibly strong. He was freakishly strong. And as long as he was spiritually faithful, that was going to be a gift that God gave him. It wasn't his wisdom. It wasn't how he taught. It wasn't the things he knew. It wasn't his ability to solve problems or encourage people or counsel people. He was just a really, really strong guy. And that was his designation. That's how people were able to know what's going on. Something is different about that guy. So we don't know how that showed up as a child, if it was tug-of-war deals, at school when you're a little kid. I don't know how it all showed up. And we could make up stories. Maybe he lifted up a mule off of an old lady who had fallen under it. Probably not. It's not the Superboy kind of thing. But he's got some sense in which he is just different, incredibly strong. And that's what set him apart. You say, well, I don't see any monsters here. All good so far. Everything was good until he hit puberty. Now, if you've raised a boy, you know this. And you might be thinking, I might have a Nazirite on my hands after all. Maybe that explains the monster that lives in my home or that I raised for 18 years. When he hit puberty, things went off the rails and things were incredibly different. And so if you have a Bible, open it up to Judges chapter 14. It's early on in the Bible, one of the first books in the Old Testament, right after Joshua, which we completed just a couple of weeks ago. And in Judges chapter 14, verse 1, it says, Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. So she's not an Israelite like him. She worships an idol called Dagon, the people of Philistia did, but nearby. So saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. The wisdom of a teenage boy, just all in our faces here. His father and mother replied, and this is what none of you dads have ever said. Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives? Or among all our other people? Now, it's a different day. It's a different time. It was more for who are you worshiping reasons rather than the bloodline. But it is here. I don't want to skip over it just because I can't explain it very well. But that was the question. He says, must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? But Samson said to his father, get her for me. She's the right one for me. So already you can see this impulsive nature in Samson, not unlike a lot of the feelings that we have along the way. You see something, you think you want it. He sees a girl from out of town for the very first time. Oh, that's my wife. Like, I'm in love. I want that woman. Like, that is the one for me. And his dad, an enabler, certainly said, well, okay, we'll go figure it out and we'll put it together and we'll meet her parents and then we'll make this thing happen. Well, on another trip to Timnah, whether he was going down just to see her again, we don't know why he was going there, but he ran across, because it is the wild, wild west, literally there, and he ran across a lion. It confronted him, maybe even attacked him. And he fought off the lion, but he had no weapon, just his hands. And at this point, he already understands he's different. And so he kills this lion and he tears the lion open with his bare hands. He leaves it there and he goes home, doesn't mention anything about it. And then in chapter 14, verse 8, it says sometime later when he went back to marry her, so now the process has already moved along, he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass, looking at his work, like what he did the last time he was there. And in it, he saw a swarm of bees and some honey. He scooped out the honey with his hands and ate as he went along. When he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they too ate it. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. Not something that's fitting for a Nazirite guy. It's gross for any person, regardless of what vows that you've taken. Just reach into this dead animal, get out some honey, begin to eat it. And then he rejoined his family on the journey, and somehow they sample it as well. I hope he had a spoon or something. I don't even want to go there with how he gave it to his parents, but they all shared in this honey. And you already see this tendency for Samson just to wander off. I feel like going over here, I'll go over here. I feel like doing that, I'll do that. I feel like eating that, I'll eat that. I feel like not telling my family where this is from and just offering this and letting them be a part of this. I'll just do that. He just tended to do whatever he felt like doing, whenever he felt like doing it. Well, they get to Timnah, and it's the wedding week, and the literal week celebration lasts an entire 7 days. So they're there beginning the 7-day party. He has a bachelor party of sorts, and he has 30 men that are not from his town, they're from Philistia. So he's there with these 30 guys from a different place worshiping a different God, and he says, hey guys, I want you to party with me. We're just gonna have fun for 7 days before this thing rolls out, before I'm married. And at the bachelor party, he tells them a riddle, which is what cool grooms do. So he says, I've got a riddle for you. And if you can tell me the answer by the end of the week, I'll give each of you a brand new outfit. Like you get new clothes, all 30 of you. But if you cannot tell me the answer at the end of the week, then you all have to present me with an outfit. So I'm going to have 30 outfits, or each of you is going to have one. However we do this, that's the riddle. And the riddle he told them was, out of the eater, something to eat. out of the strong something sweet. They didn't know the story about the lion. They didn't know the honey. They didn't know the bees. They didn't know that whole weird thing. But he's got this riddle. He puts it out. They don't know what it is. And they go to his bride-to-be, which legally is already his wife, but they haven't had the ceremony yet. But they go to the lady and they say, we need to know the answer to this riddle. And she says, well, I don't know the riddle. And then surprisingly, and you can go back and read through this in Judges 14. We won't read all the verses, but they tell her, well, you either find out for us or we're going to burn your house down and your whole family. So never has a group of men wanted clothes so badly and to say, we're going to burn your house down if you don't tell us the answer to this joke that he told us the first night of the wedding party. Just an odd scenario. I just chalk it up as different day and time. I don't get it. I don't get their humor. I don't get their responses, but that's how they chose to respond. Certainly there was just a little bit of an insecurity thing. There was you're embarrassing us, that kind of thing happening. But nonetheless, they go to her and tell her this. So she feels like her family's future is on the line. And in Judges chapter 14, verse 16, it says, Samson's wife, talking about this lady he was to marry that week, threw herself on him, sobbing, you hate me. You don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. I haven't even explained it to my father or mother, he replied, so why should I explain it to you? She cried the whole 7 days of the feast. So on the seventh day, he finally told her because she continued to press him, and she in turn explained the riddle to her people. So she cries for a week. And he's listening over and over. And there's not a man alive that wouldn't do anything or say anything to make that stop. And so he said, fine, here's the answer. And he told her. And then they went to Samson and said, not because anyone helped us, but because we're smart, it's honey. That is the answer to your riddle. Samson knew that he had, in a way, been deceived. So he said, fine, I'll do what I said I was going to do. So he went and found a group of people outside of the wedding party, and he killed 30 men, stripped their clothes off, took those 30 garments, dropped them at the feet of his, you can call them groomsmen or whoever was a part of that party, and said, there you go. Now you've been paid. And he left town, walked out. While he was gone, the lady's dad said, we've already paid for it. So they got one of the other men to marry her, and he loses his wife. So he comes back and things unfold and he just tears up some more stuff, kills some more people, and you can kind of see how this goes. So Samson is a bit unhinged. He's got all this strength. He's got God's favor on him. He's taken the vow of the Nazirite. There's just a lot going on with his life. And yet he's ready to begin to move on. So he moves on by blowing off steam and partying in another town. And he finds a prostitute and says, I'm going to spend the night with her. He spends the night with this prostitute, and not surprising to any of us in this room, the very next morning he woke up and said, I think I love her. Like, I think she's the one. Number two, I was wrong before, but this is the one. So Samson decides he's in love with this lady, and he says, oh, by the way, what's your name? And she said, Delilah. And this is now his girl. Well, he's caused a lot of trouble. He's hurt a lot of people, literally, physically hurt a lot of people in town. They want to get rid of him. So they go to Delilah, these men, and say, who's the guy that you've been with? I don't know who you're talking about. Oh, yes, you do. And I know he pays you to be with him, but we'll pay you even more if you'll tell us the secret to his strength, because we can't do anything with him. We can't kick him out of town. We can't handle him. He's completely off the rails. We don't know how to do anything here without Samson stopping us, so we're powerless. Tell us what the secret is. So she begins to ask night after night, what's the secret? He lies to her, and she tries to make good with that and tries to deceive him, and they're just deceiving each other back and forth. Incredibly healthy beginning to a relationship. And they're back and forth, and it's not ever working. And Delilah's getting frustrated because she's got money on the line. Some guys are going to pay her more if she will give them the secret to Samson's strength. And in chapter 16, verse 15, she said to him, how can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the third time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So he told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. So he tells her really what's going on. I don't know that she truly believed that. That seems like a pretty wild story. But nonetheless, she put him to sleep in her lap. And while he's there, she motions for other Philistine guys to come in, and they have shears and they cut off his braids. His hair is now cut. And then she yells at Samson, get up, people are here. And in verse 20, she calls, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He woke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. So he wasn't stressed. They can bind me up. I'll just knock it out and maybe I'll kill a few. It'll be fine. And then the phrase, but he did not know that the Lord had left him. And that is the sobering fear. Because from his perspective, he knew he had made a lot of dumb decisions. Done a lot of things he wasn't proud of, a lot of things not fitting for him. In fact, there had to be a weird feeling of hypocrisy as he's sitting there with her in her bed, talking to this prostitute, saying, well, the truth is, I'm a called man of God, and God's favor's on me, and it's my strength just the fact that he would be able to say, I'm a spiritual man, like he's so blind to what's going on. But he had no clue that this time he wasn't going to be able to get himself out of his mess again. That the only reason he had been able to get free in the first place was simply an act of grace by God. He thought all this time that he had gotten himself out of the mess, and the truth was he was just using a gift God had given him, and God removed the gift, and he lost all of his power. And could it be that some of us are setting ourselves up for the shock of our lives when we realize the same things that we've done to always get us out of the mess no longer work? And we realize that it wasn't actually us that was getting ourselves out of all these problems up until now. It was actually God's grace on each of us. Samson had no clue. And the truth was his lack of self-control had robbed him of everything. His inability to just walk away, to stop, to have a reason, his inability to have that self-control ultimately ruined him. Now, Samson could have justified, rationalized every single poor decision he made. Well, I was tired, I was hungry, I was sad, I was betrayed, I was hurt, I was lonely, I've been called, all of these feelings he had. I feel like this, I feel like that, I just thought that, all of the feelings. But feelings ultimately led Samson to his downfall. And if you right now are just living by your own feelings, just whatever you feel in the moment, eventually you're going to find yourself spiritually bald, weak, and full of regrets. So for Samson, I think the only questions he ever asked himself, if he asked any at all, is what do I feel like doing? Who do I feel like being with? What do I feel like taking? What do I feel like saying? Where do I feel like going? Just everything was just right now, what is my feeling? And for you and me to learn anything from Samson's cautionary, very cautionary story, I think we have to ask better questions. And I want to give you just a few as an example here as we try to process through what it is God's taught us here. The first question is, what did God create me to do? You may have never asked that other than some philosophical, just, I wonder what the meaning of life is kind of thing before. But what did God create me to do? Samson had a calling on his life to be the physical and in a way spiritual leader, if at least example, for his own people. And if every time he had an opportunity to do something, if with every opportunity to think one thing, do one thing, take one thing, go somewhere, if he had just stopped and said, what have I been created to do? That could have changed everything. There needed to be moments in life, in Samson's life, where he just said, this is what I feel like doing, but a man of God doesn't do that. This is what I feel like taking, but a man of God doesn't do that. This is what I feel like saying, but a man of God doesn't say those things. And for you and me, we have to constantly, daily, if not multiple times a day, ask ourselves, what have I been created to do? There needs to be some moment in your life, young ladies, where you just say, you know what? This is what I feel like doing, but a woman of God doesn't do that. A woman of God doesn't say that. A woman of God doesn't go with him. A woman of God doesn't have that experience, and just walk away, because it's not what you were created to do. And every man in this room, we've got to, at some point, be willing to look at an invitation and say, oh, that's very tempting, but men of God just don't do that. If we don't believe that men can be destructive and take down even a city, we're not paying attention here. In fact, about every lady in this room ought to, under your breath, at some point over the last 15 minutes, thought, men are the worst. Like, you should have thought that. And I have no way to explain this away. I can't for myself, for Samson, or anyone else. It's ridiculous. But that's what it is to live by your feelings. Never asking the question, but what did God create me to do? And if we don't have God's calling on our heart, in our heart, then we're going to continue to make mistake after mistake. Maybe not to Samson's level. None of us are capable of doing the things Samson did, but we can burn a place down pretty quickly with our lack of self-control. The second question, what promises have I made? Samson, as a Nazirite, had made promises to God. This is how I'm going to live my life. This is what I'm going to stay away from. And if you look at the Nazirite promises, and then you look at how Samson lived his life, no alcohol. I have trouble thinking he did anything without a drink in his hand, watching the way he lived. Staying away from dead stuff. Don't eat unclean foods. Don't let your head be shaved. Don't let your hair be cut. All of those things, one by one by one. It was as if Samson said, let me do the exact opposite of everything that I've said I'm going to do. What promises have I made? And none of us is ever going to be in the position that Samson was in. But all of us have made promises and vows, and we've said words. We've said, I'll be faithful, I'll be true, I'll be yours, you can count on me, I'll do this job, I'll accept this task. We've all made promises. You say, well, it was just words, it wasn't really a promise. Everything we say, it's our word. And at some point, we have to be able to say, I gave my word. I don't want to do this, but I gave my word. I feel differently, but I gave my word. I want to go there, but I gave my word. And our words have to mean something at some point. And all of us at some point have been in front of God. And many of us who have been there in that spot know what it is to drop to a knee or to close our eyes or to bow our heads or to say, God, I will never, ever again, and then fill in the blank. And then the very next moment when you do that, there is just this feeling of guilt and shame that just wipes us out almost because we didn't keep our word. Now, we're not going to get it right all the time, but if we would just throughout our day say, what have I promised? To whom have I promised? Like, what have I said I'm going to do? And keep those promises in front of us. It will protect us from so many poor decisions. And then the third question is, what dreams do I have? Now, I'm a dreamer. I don't tend to write things down a lot. I just have a lot going on in my head. That's probably explains a lot of stuff, but I've got a lot of things happening up here. I have a lot of images and pictures and ideas and all that. But even if you're not a dreamer, at least take some time at some point to write down, here are the words that I hope describe my life and my legacy. Here is a picture of what I hope things turn out to be. And none of us in our list or in that picture we have financially broken, relationally trashed, regret. Like, none of us have any of those things. But the only way to keep that from happening along the way is to ask the question, what dreams do I have? And to be able to say from time to time, God has bigger plans for me. Because it's not always a right or wrong, evil or pure. That's not always the question. Most of you know when you see something evil and you want to step away from it. Sometimes it's just better and best. There are times when you see something and think, I want to, I'd really like to be a part of that, or I want to go there, or I want to say yes. but I believe God's got bigger plans for me. And I don't want to miss out. So I'm going to, in this moment, resist. I'm going to walk away. I'm going to turn around. I'm going to reject that. Just by asking the question, what dreams do I have? Well, because Samson could not restrain himself, because he had no self-control, he obviously ruined a lot of lives, took a lot of lives, and he found himself chained, literally in chains, in a jail, to the point where they'd cut off his hair, not his head, dead if you do that, but cut off his hair in chains. And the story goes that they gouged his eyes out as well. So he's there in chains with no hair, bound up, can't see anything, so far removed from being the deliverer, the rescuer that God had ultimately called him to be. Because when you think about Samson in the beginning, regardless of the morality, you kind of picture a Thor kind of guy. You know, you got the hair and you look and the muscles and all the opportunity, everything. It's like, yeah. And then now is the monster. You got a man with no eyes, no hair, in chains, strapped to the wall of a prison cell in a foreign town. Truly a monster. So he's there, stuck. The story's over. But then we have one more verse that I want to read to you today, verse 22. This is the one, even as a kid, when I first began to read about Samson, I underlined, highlighted over and over again. But the hair on his head began to grow again. That is such a powerful thing there, because this didn't have to be in there. If you don't know the end of the story, he's going to be dead really soon. So this is like, it's not really important how long was his hair when he died. That wasn't a thing. And it's not even supernatural. Most of you, if we put razor to your head, it's going to grow back, at least a little. In the next couple of, like hair grows back. That's not a miracle from God. A few of you may, but for most of it, it's not a miracle. It grows back, no matter who we are. But this is here to tell us more than he was growing stubble on his head again. And I wonder even if Samson knew. There were no mirrors. I'm not even sure how much he could stretch the chains. But if he was able at some point to touch his head, even with those chains around him, what it must have been like when he felt the little hair growing back, to think, is it possible you're not done with me yet? Is it possible, God, that there's one more moment left in me? Well, not long after that, we don't know exactly how many days, but he was brought out in front of the people as they were celebrating their idol, Dagon. They were worshiping their God. They were having a pagan ceremony. They wanted to have Samson brought out as entertainment. He's brought out, and many of you know how this goes. He went to one of the servants who had brought him out. He said, will you lean me up against the column? I'm not strong anymore, and I'm feeling kind of weak. So they leaned him up against the column. And then in verse 28, it says, Samson prayed to the Lord, Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more. And let me, with one blow, get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. And that ended Samson's 20-year reign as the judge in Israel. Now, the legacy is complicated. There's not a whole lot of good. There's a lot of blood. There's a lot of death. There's a lot of broken heart. A lot of very confused ladies. There's a lot of guys who were embarrassed. And then you got parents just going, we love him, he's ours, but I don't know. It's a very confusing legacy. But even with all of that, at the very end, when he called out to God, God said, I'm listening. And I don't know what messes of your own lives that you feel like you've made because of your lack of self-control, your lack of willingness, or perceived lack of ability to walk away from choices. But no matter what it is, there's a moment where you, even now, could ask God, Sovereign Lord, just once more, if you'd give me one more opportunity and fill me with enough strength, I'm going to make the right decision this time around. You say, well, if I was God, I know it doesn't make any sense other than God is full of mercy and grace. It makes no sense that God would honor that prayer of Samson's. And it makes no sense that God would honor my prayer when I asked for God's mercy after lying to him and not fulfilling the promises and vows that I've made to him throughout my lifetime, but he does. And so my hope and prayer is that you would be at that space today, no matter how full of regret you may feel like your life is, to stop and say, God, starting today, I have new questions that I'm going to ask. And it's going to begin with, who am I created to be? And then I'm beginning to walk that out in faith.